Good evening, everybody. Apologize for the delay in getting started. Welcome to this first meeting of November here. I want to thank the Maryland Theater for having us over earlier for their sound system dedication. It was great to see all the new equipment and hear the great sound that they have. And if you've been to a concert lately there, then you can attest to how much of an improvement that is. Our first item on the work session agenda tonight is the street closure request for the Crumpy's New Year's Eve Donut Drop. This is a premier event.
You want me to know? Good evening, Mr. Mayor and
Hello,
City Council.
Karen
We're
and
here for a
friends.
street closure request, and it's a very exciting event. It's a delicious event. And I'm here with Melissa Fountain and Peter Bickford of What's Next, and they would like to do the Crumpy's New Year's Eve Donut Drop. And I'll let them explain it, but what we're here for approval is a street closure similar to the Maryland Theater wind down, closures from 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve. And with that, I will give that over to Melissa.
Hi, everyone. I'm hoping you're pretty much familiar with the event so far. We've been doing a lot of advertising for it, but basically we are dropping a giant donut from the sky on New Year's Eve. Basically.
Yeah.
No crystal ball. There will be Crumpy's Donuts there afterwards. I'm not sure that you would want to munch on these. But it'll be a giant donut made up of little donut holes. And at 6:59:59, we'll have a mock New Year, so it's family friendly. But we'd like to have an event just to get residents into downtown. We've never had a New Year's Eve event like this. We're getting businesses to hold events before and after, so we can get people here and then keep them here for the rest of the night. And for South Potomac, we would like to close that down, not only for overflow, but we'd like to have some events in that area. I'm looking at a rock climbing wall. Bickles will be involved in this event, and they'd like to do some demonstrations on longboards, have some ramps.
Is this a snow or shine event?
We are going to have, yes, but we're going to have some backup locations to get everybody out of the street quickly. But if it was snow, it'd be much better for Bickles. It'd be a much more fun area.
I'm hoping there's
Great. I think this is a great idea. I'd like to see you all get enough things going to keep people down late. It would be fantastic. I think we can close it down as long as you want on New Year's Eve.
And when do we start promoting this?
Right
It's
away.
already been promoted.
Yeah,
Where's
it's
it
out
at?
there.
Where's it at? I want to be
In
able
the
that people are saying
square.
they see it, okay?
The donut, it's
Everything.
coming from the square, yes.
Okay.
And the clock tower there in the High Rock building, that will be the face of the donut. And then it will drop down from there.
And What's Next, it's already had it. We have it on our school flyers. We've been working a number of ways, so people will know it's happening. There are no samples tonight. I just want to note that. I did ask Mr. Beckford to bring that.
Or there were.
Yeah, you know. Session with
That's great.
Yeah, we've done a lot of advertising for this already in our publication at Leitersburg Cinemas and just basically Facebook as
I've
well
seen it
has been very
around.
nice.
Yeah.
So I guess you're going to have to find out where in the world at 7:59 it's actually New Year's.
Yeah.
Maybe tie in with them.
6:59.
6:59.
Seriously?
It won't be
And,
London.
we are
Do a
having.
little tie-in.
Yeah.
with it.
We've had a logistics meeting, and we're going to have another one just to make sure it's safe. The donut comes down safe, and everything's good in that vein as well.
And everything's free. I mean, this is free for businesses to take part in, free hot chocolate, free coffee. You do get a free donut hole. You might have to, if you want to get a dozen after that, you know.
And you don't have
for
to run
those.
up to the one that drops to get it.
Right now.
And Crumpy's does open at 7 p.m., do they not?
Yeah, so we could
So-
head there
Yeah.
soon.
Soon.
In an hour.
Great.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank
Looks like you have
Thanks a
full
lot for your
council
work.
support.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's easy.
Okay?
Thanks.
We'll see you there.
The next item on our agenda is the City Center Dollars Holiday Promotion.
I don't have donuts.
Good evening.
That's right. Have a good
See you now. It's-
Good news. Come on, Andrew. Good news.
Oh no, this is good news too.
Usually you come up with good news, so
I wanted to update the mayor and council tonight on a holiday promotion that we're doing again this year with the City Center Dollars. The City Center Dollars program was actually kicked off in general last year with a holiday promotion, where if you bought $20 worth of the City Center Dollars, you got an extra $5 coupon or voucher to be used downtown businesses. We'd like to run that again this year. Over the last year, the City Center Dollars has really done pretty well. Altogether, in fiscal year 12, $9,000 in City Center Dollars is sold. This year, we're already up to 6,500 City Center Dollars that have been sold that are then used in downtown businesses. We're doing a few new things this year to promote this promotion, and we're going to be doing banners hung up on the parking garage and on the overpass. That's pretty effective. An updated holiday ad that was in Hagerstown Magazine. It's part of the packet, but Hagerstown Magazine this month did a City Center, a Downtown Alliance feature, and then they actually put our dining ad, which talks about the promotion, right next to it. So that's a pretty nice little splash. Updated sandwich board signage. There are static window clings that go in all the businesses that participate in the City Center Dollars program. There are 29 of those right now, and that increases on a fairly regular basis. Updated promotional flyers for distribution. Extensive advertising on the city's Facebook page. We're finding out that we have a number of the City of Hagerstown municipal Facebook page, friends or followers, and that's been a very effective outreach process for us. So we're going to really hammer that home. And email communications from the city to the city's lists, and we're also going to be updating the City Center Dollars presence on the city's website. In your packet is some of the imagery that we've created actually in-house for this promotion. But we want to make you aware of it. We're going to be coming in and talking about a few different downtown promotions that we're implementing, including Small Business Saturday, which is going to be on November 30th. I'd like to come back and talk to you on the 19th of this month about that and some of the successes we're. That's the notification. Some of the things we're doing with that. So, does anybody have any questions about the program? Or?
Yeah, I have a question. It says you have 29 businesses currently, and the number increases as more businesses become aware of the benefits. Mm-hmm. Well, why would anyone object since we're paying the differential?
Well, to participate in the City Center's Dollar program in general, you have to. There's a contract you sign saying that if somebody walks in with a coupon, then you will accept it and then redeem it over with us. There's some businesses that don't think that they're not opposed to this promotion in general, but it's sometimes we need to convince a business to join the program in general because there's some businesses that offer services that they don't think that they will get a coupon off the street to use. I'm trying to think, for instance, like an architectural service company might not necessarily see the benefit of somebody walking in with a $5, $10, $20 coupon for their business. But there are other ways to talk about that. I mean, it's not only participating in accepting a coupon; it's also participating in your community and becoming being a good member of the downtown business. So nobody has any problems with this promotion. This is completely funded by the city.
Well, that's my question.
Yeah.
And I know the reason you do $5 increments is so that businesses aren't stuck having to give cash change to folks who.
Correct.
And I know I was at the Fat Cats recently when Keely came to discuss with the owners signing up for the program, everything, and she talked about perhaps getting eventually to the point where we have little cards, almost like a debit card, so you'd eliminate that whole change aspect of it.
I think in creating some of the promotional material that's going out with this promotion, the banners and everything else. We the window clings and things like that. We've created all that design work to hopefully end up with a card system. We've been investigating the card systems for a little while. They're a little bit expensive, but that changes annually. The cost of those comes down. Talking about open loop, closed loop, just downtown, citywide, it's a big conversation.
Right.
But we're this is a good interim step for us, I think.
No, I think it's great. Yeah.
Thank you.
If you buy some from
They do.
Christmas presents,
They do, but it's
Yeah.
about 6 months out. It's
Right.
not a short fuse. It's a long.
okay, so
And stated clearly.
Excuse me?
Stated clearly when they expire?
It is. It's stated on the coupon itself.
Those numbers again on sales last year. And this
Last year, for the entire year, there's about $9,000 worth of coupons that were purchased. So far this year, obviously ending at the end of the fiscal year, we've already sold 6,500. So we'll double, I think, especially with this holiday promotion coming up and the way we're promoting it. We'll double the use of this. And at that point, it really, efficiency-wise, then it makes sense to start talking about a card.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next up is the Hagerstown Suns Municipal Stadium improvements for the 2014 season.
Good evening. Minor League Baseball comes in and visits the stadium occasionally, and last month they did that. They gave us a report of some issues that they would like to see addressed. We worked with the Suns and basically negotiated the requirements down to a very short list that's shown in the memo, and I think you can factor or lump them all together as either player safety or fan safety items that they're recommending to be done down at the stadium for the upcoming season. Cleaning the field lights and replacing any that are kind of at the end of their life. The outfield fence is getting in pretty poor condition where the plywood fastens to some of the chain link, and we would replace that so that there's no issues with players hitting that. Some additional padding and some miscellaneous fan protection. So our recommendation is that we move forward with these improvements for next year. Because we have an additional year on the lease down there, and various improvements are required of the lease. So this seems to fit within that.
Looks good. Any questions or comments?
Well, I would say 15,000, but I would be hard put to put significant permanent improvements there until we know what we're doing. So, and I appreciate that you haven't come in for the whole 35,000. And, I think we should know if there's a significant dent in that beyond this.
So this 15 is part of the larger 35 that we're obligated to spend under the agreement.
35 is capital improvements that we have to spend down there. Now, we still pay utilities, we still do pest control, we still pick up the garbage, all those operating expenses. But the capital improvements, the lease says we're obligated to do 35.
So
15 comes out of the 35.
So that comes out of the 35, but if you look at the larger budgetary expense for the city, I think last year was like 168,000, which is offset by about 40 couple thousand in amusement tax revenue, or a subsidy of about 120,000 in addition. And just so there's no confusion, I'm going to have some concern with spending that 168,000 next season. With the budgetary obligations that we have facing us for a team that does not expect to be here after another year.
Right. And that number has been dropping the last 2 years. That was the
it
number
went down
about
to like 73.
Yeah. Now it's down around 70, 72,000. And I can give you those numbers if you'd like to see those. But that is really just, like I said, it's kind of the basics of keeping the place going. Utilities is the biggest part. 40,000 of that's utilities. Picking up the trash, pest control, our insurance, those things.
And I just want to make clear that there is a very logical and understandable argument to say, whoa. The Suns are leaving Hagerstown and moving out and made that clear to us. Why would we put another penny into this stadium and not tell them, because we can tell them right now, we can give them 90 days notice and they won't be playing in Hagerstown next year. And the reason is because I think it should be clear that we as a council have not given up on the idea of professional baseball in Hagerstown. Is there any viable thought process right now that that's going to happen, assuming the Suns leave, which we assume? Right now, there's not. But if we want to be assured that we won't have an opportunity for professional baseball in the future, send the Suns a 90 days notice and kick them out, and then try to go find a minor league team, especially under the league constraints that we understand happen. So, and we wanted to keep baseball in town, and this is the expense that we've been paying for years for it, so I would support it. our choice is either do that or tell the Suns that we're not renewing the lease and that they have to find somewhere else next year. I don't think that's appropriate.
Any other questions, comments?
We just make a comment that goes along with Lou. We have enough slums in town. We don't need another one at the baseball stadium.
I think that they've fared out pretty well, considering they only had to pay us $1 and for what the city has done. So I don't think that's a bad thing.
Okay, so we're good with the suggested improvements. Thank you, Mr. Engineer.
Sure.
And I know you're going to be doing the pavement preservation program, but I just want to thank you because I do think you are the finest city engineer in the whole United States,
Thank
and
you.
perhaps the whole world. Because
Tell me, what is this about?
I just think I have worked with Rodney for
Since you're okay,
a
well, I thought
number of
maybe you were
years.
promoting something.
No,
here.
and I'm just promoting.
Does each director is what you are now referred to? Is that correct? Are you a director or are you a manager? I don't know what you are.
He's a
Anyway, I
department
think that they should each get a crown, and who's ever doing the best of whatever each one. Huh?
No, but I think Rodney does
I
such a
thought
good
you were
job
going
of
somewhere with that.
being data driven. I mean, this presentation that we're about to get is really, really good, and he is.
Yeah, but you'll have a headache with me after it, so.
Well, that's okay. But I think
I know.
he deserves a lot of credit for being an engineer with really good people skills, which is not always
And he does
easy
have
to find
that.
in that community. So thank you, Rodney. Take
Thank
it
you.
away.
That's quite an introduction. Well, I thought we ought to take some time.
Rodney, why don't you ask for a pay raise?
I'm good. I think picking up the trash, keeping our roads passable and smooth and nice to ride on is some of the core services that we provide. So I thought we ought to take a little bit of time so that you can understand how we as a staff put together our recommendations and try to help make decisions about how we try to keep the roads in the city in good shape. So if you can tolerate this with me here a little bit, I'd like to walk through this little presentation. Back in the old days, what we did prior to like 1995, basically what happened is one of the staff would go out and drive around. He'd find the worst 15 or 20 roads that were in the city, and we'd budget for those, and we would we would just pave them. We wouldn't mill them, just pave them. Blacktop was cheap in those days. It was under $20, $25 a ton, and that was a fine system. There was nothing at all wrong with that. Around 1995, we began to mill the streets because of the building up of the blacktop around the curbs, and we also developed a kind of a basic database of our streets and the condition of them based on one of our staff, again, driving the streets, but driving all the streets. And we look at traffic volumes and the ride and the condition of the streets, and we had a database that we worked from. Well, the thing that's really changing in this whole part of what we do is the cost of asphalt. Asphalt now is $75 a ton, and it's 3 times what it was just about 15 years ago. We budget around $600,000 annually for our paving program, and our highway user revenue we get from the state has been lately here. It's been around $350,000. So our revenues are down and our costs are significantly up if we keep doing the same old thing. So the Corps of Engineers, the American Public Works Association, Federal Highway have all looked at this issue because everybody's facing this, and they said, what we're seeing now is that doing this paving where you just do the worst streets in town first is not the practice that you should be following, because what happens is as you just fix those, all the other streets in the city are slowly getting worse and worse, and you're only fixing such a small portion of them. And it costs so much more to mill a street, make major patches to it, than it is to do some of the other techniques that I'll talk about later, like crack filling and slurry sealing. So this notion of pavement preservation is what people talk about in the field of maintaining these streets. And what it is, basically, is we know we're never going to have enough money to make our roads perfect and smooth, and what we need to do is preserve the ones that are in good shape and keep them in the best shape as possible. So that the little phrase they like to use is the right treatment to the right pavement at the right time. And really what that means in real terms is that you're not really talking about pothole filling anymore, but it's pothole prevention. It's not a it is proactive. It's not reactive to when you start having problems and then fix it. You try to keep the potholes from happening in the first place. So just a little background on this. The way we look at the streets is that we basically grade them. And just like when we were in school, if you got 100% on your test, your mama would be proud of you. And if you got a 0 on your test, you might be in big trouble. And so the same score applies here. And here's the chart that is used. That 100 is, that's a brand new street. We just paved it. It's smooth. It's in great shape. And 0 is pretty much completely failed. The city's overall PCI, pavement condition survey, if you average in all the streets, right now is at 77.4, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's generally accepted that when a street gets into this range and around 55, it'll deteriorate to this point, maybe in 15 years, and then once it gets to this point and it's got a lot of cracks in it, it's starting to get what we call oxidation, where the pavement's getting really grayish looking and the stones are getting real prominent in the pavement and it's getting real brittle. After that, when the water starts to get into it, it starts to drop its condition very quickly, and that's when you get a lot of potholes and a lot more deterioration. So what we wanted to find out was what is the condition of our streets. So last October, we awarded a contract to Enterprise Information, who drove the whole city. That's a piece of equipment that they used. And they basically did a 3D scan of all the streets in town. And the data that they gave us looks something like this. This one's not in your packet, but that's just a snapshot of a typical road in the city, where the green is the various cracks that they picked up. The blue is some of the rutting that they saw. And this is important because depending on what kind of defects are in the road will affect how you fix the road. So it picked up cracks, and there's 8 different kinds of cracks. I won't get into all that. There's rutting, there's what they call raveling, where the real fine material comes out of the road and you get this rough road, as I was talking about before, different things like that. But the nice thing about this that I really like about it is there's no human judgment in this. This is basically a picture of the roads, and it comes back and gives us the data of what's out there without somebody trying to guess what's going on there. So, what did we find out? And I guess we'll present this in 3 different ways. The first is, what we found out is that on this pie chart, 36% of our roads are in excellent shape. They have a very high PCI rating. 40% are satisfactory, 12% are fair, 10% are poor, and about 2% are what's considered very poor. Now again, in the old days, what we would have done is we would have figured out which streets those were by driving around, and we would have spent all our money on that orange sliver, or as much as we could on that orange sliver. But to me, what happens over time is that whole circle kind of shifts counterclockwise, and if you're only spending money on that little sliver, the green is starting to become yellow, the blue is starting to become green. To me, it's like the baby boomers. We all know that we're all getting older, and eventually there's going to be a lot of healthcare needs in our country, right? This is coming, and we know there's a lot of streets that are in fair condition that we need to be looking at them as well. So this is one way that we can look at our PCI condition. We also have a map now that shows basically the condition of every street in the city, and the green are good, the yellow or fair, and it's hard to pick out on this, I realize, and here's a little bit of a blow up, but the darker brown sections are the worst conditions. They have the lowest PCI in the city, and if anybody's interested in any particular streets, I can let you know. Then, well, the question obviously then is, well, how does that compare? We know that our PCI rating came in at 75.9, and we just did a bunch of paving, so it bumped it up. What we think now is about 77.4. But how do we compare to other jurisdictions? So I asked the consultant that did the scan for us, can you give me some other streets or other communities, and so I can see how we compared? And I was pleasantly surprised by this graphic that shows that these were 8 that he just randomly gave me. I think we were better than all of them but 1, and we were much better than several of those. So in general, the conclusion here is that our score of 75.9, or what we think is now bumped up to 77.4 since we just did this paving, is really pretty good. the big question is, are we going to be able to keep them in good shape over the long haul? And that's the second part of a pavement management. We know what we got. How are we going to deal with this in the future? So Federal Highway has a model that we use that puts in factors like the general deterioration of the streets over every year. It has a decision mechanism in there that we can put in different practices that we use. And what we've been using the last few years is obviously milling and paving, which is the more expensive variety. We've been doing a lot of crack filling, which takes a road and basically tries to keep the water out of it. We've been using some slurry seals, which to me is like an industrial driveway sealer. It basically seals the road, covers up that oxidation. And the other thing we've been doing is some patching, and we have good data from this scan now that tells us where we need to do those kind of patches, and we did some of them this summer. So all that data then can be put into this model, and then we can start running all these what-if scenarios. What if we spend this much money? What if we do these techniques? And I could sit here and bore you with those for a long time, but I just wanted to show you 5. This is the first one. This is a what-if scenario of what happens if we just spend $350,000 a year for 10 years, every year for 10 years. Doesn't really account for inflation, but we spent $350 a year, and all we did was pave. All we did was mill and pave, like we did in the old days. And what this shows is that year 1 is here on the left. You have a lot of streets that are pretty good shape in the green, but over time, your PCI is going to drop down to 57.1 because all you're really fixing is the worst streets. So all the streets are generally deteriorating. So you're losing your greens, and you're gaining a lot more grays and reds at the bottom. So 57.1 is where we'd be 10 years from now, and I think you'd be very mad at the city engineer. Then what happens if we use a pavement preservation technique where we do the crack filling, the slurry sealing, and we actually spend more money doing that than we do just paving? And what this shows is that your greens are fairly well maintained. You're starting to get some streets at the bottom there that are in poor shape because we're not quite spending as much money on those really bad streets. But the PCI ends at 64, which is significantly better than just the 57 if we were just paving. This is pavement preservation. This is paving. This is pavement preservation. So then we ran another what-if scenario. What happens if we spent twice that much money? And 350 just happens to be about our highway user revenue. What happens if we could get twice as much highway user revenue or funds to do this? What would happen? And again, this is just paving. We are at 77.4 now. We would drop down to about 64.6, which is interesting that it's almost exactly the same as if we use pavement preservation techniques and spend half that money. So basically you're throwing away $350,000 a year by using the wrong techniques, in my opinion. So that's just paving. What happens if we do pavement preservation? Well, now we're starting to look pretty good because you see all the green are being maintained. We're crack filling, we're slurry sealing, we're patching, isolated patches where we need to. So it's staying pretty good. And this probably is going to be our recommendation because I think it's a realistic budget number for us. We're right in around that range right now as far as we've been spending about 400 to 600. And I think hopefully with encouraging more highway user revenue, we can possibly get to something of this order of magnitude. But people always ask me, well, how are we doing? Are we going to keep up or where are we going? And we did run the model of what it would take just to tread water and keep them exactly the way they are. And it's basically, that's a nice fancy number, 1,428,000. Basically, I'd say it's $1 million. So when the Secretary of Transportation was up here for his tour, my point to him about highway user revenue was, you're giving us 300,000. We need 3 times that much. And I could show him this data if it would help him. And I think he sees this other places as well. But we're just not getting enough money from the state to help us maintain our roads. And apparently they're working at that. Apparently they have a committee studying that, and he told us that he would get back to us on that. So our recommendation will be a pavement preservation program and spending about $700,000. I just wanted to point out too that while they were out there driving for a couple thousand extra dollars, we had them do an inventory of all the signs in the city, and Eric Dykey's staff does a tremendous job. taking care of our traffic signs is something we totally take for granted. But if you want a good trivia question, there's 8,482 traffic signs in the city of Hagerstown, and 115 of them are in bad shape. That's 1.4%. So that tells me that they're doing a good job of taking care of those. But now they know where they're all at. They know the condition. They know the type, and that was just really good data that we picked up on the side. So all that leads to the simply saying that there's a list in here for 2014 that was actually compiled last year, and then the 2015 list is a solid pavement preservation program based on about a $700,000 a year budget. So that's how we got to those two lists. So that's our recommendation for moving forward.
On the 400,000 fund balance, one-time highway user revenue, is that the application of what was approved this past year, or is that assuming that we get that grant again this coming year?
It's the application this past year that we didn't spend.
Carried over.
Right.
Okay, because, you know, there is a tremendous struggle going on within that committee, and I'm aware of that, and MML's represented there, to get a much better permanent deal for the municipalities, whether out of the gas tax increase, essentially.
Right.
Whether anything comes of that, it's hard to know. But at the same time, there's also an expectation that there may be another lump sum amount, which would then, I guess, apply to FY16 under what you're saying.
Right.
But this is the one we just got. It's
Right.
not an assumption of a new one.
Correct.
Okay.
There's some of it we didn't spend, and then a portion of it we were going to spend on Church Street that we couldn't
Right.
do this year because we couldn't
Right.
get all the
Right.
handicap ramps and sidewalks fixed. So we're postponing that till next year.
So essentially, this is, we're not using any general fund PAYGO at the moment.
Not for the next year.
Not next year, yeah.
If we don't get that one-time revenue, then we've got a struggle in 15.
In 15.
Well, wait a minute. Oh, if the 300,000 is the low level.
Yeah.
The 400,000 is an amount we've already received, the way I hear you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So FY16 would be the issue. Now, this preliminary budget right here is.
This would be the
is it for
14 budget here.
Well, you say 300,000 for FY15 highway user revenue, so I assumed it was.
That should have been 14. It should have been. It's for next summer.
Well,
right. No, that would be 15 because we do the paving after July
right,
1st.
yeah.
Yeah, my mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, July 1st. Yeah, it's 15.
It's 15 is the way I read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've already spent 14's money.
Rodney, this is a very professional and data-driven presentation.
Thank you.
I mean, it's sort of taking the politics out of roads, building roads and refurbishing roads.
That is part of the goal, to try to have some rhyme or reason what we're doing.
There's still politics, Don. Can we do 350, 700, or a million?
Well, sure, but it's not about the good old days.
Yeah.
I think one of the additional good points that often isn't conveyed to the public candidly enough, and I see this on a number of streets, and I'll give you an example. I think Moeller Avenue. There is, you go down the street and there is basically what amounts to small trees growing out of the curb and sidewalk. And I think it's important for residents to be aware as much as possible that when you're doing that yard work, when you're doing that sort of property maintenance, that by keeping the curbs clear of that debris and keeping the curbs clear of the grass growth, that in itself is part of that pavement maintenance process. And the more that is done on our residential streets, the less soon we've got to get to them for that type of crack sealing and slurry and things like that, because the grass that you see above the ground is infiltrating water, tens of feet down into the ground just by creating that space and widening and pushing it. And I don't think enough jurisdictions in general provide that type of awareness to their citizenry. So, and your one picture up there, I think, shows it very plainly in that 3D scan that, while you think, oh, there's just, some grass growing there, water may sink in 3 inches. In that one picture, it's probably sinking down, 2 feet and going 2 feet under the road.
That's really true of the residential streets where there's not a lot of traffic. And
it just sits there and grows and grows and widens.
Now, you have requested us to approve the list of streets proposed for preservation.
2014 and the list for 2015.
Right. And what we do then, as soon as everybody here is happy with it, then we send it out to all the utilities, gas company, everybody, and we basically say, coming up in the next 2 years, this is when we're going to pave these streets. And we give them,
I am going to speak.
We give them a discount to do their line work before we pave, and there's a significant penalty, like 6 times, if they have to cut the street after we pave for 5 years. That's true, and then, of course, the curb and sidewalk notices go out, too.
And I will address this. Back in 2000, whatever it was, between 1 and 4, Mulberry was redone, okay? As soon as Mulberry was redone, gas company comes in. We already start pocketing out. Right now, and I called Rodney, because with what they have going on is on one side of the street where there's no parking, on this side of the street where there is parking, and the side that, from what I'm hearing, is going to be gone over with some asphalt is going to be the side that there is no parking. I don't care if it's one side or the other. This street has been destroyed. So is North Avenue, if you go down it, and you see where the patching has gone on. This street was supposed to have been resurfaced back when my kids were in Little League. And it just got resurfaced between 2001 and 2004. And we now are looking at going to be a nightmare. And I don't care what kind of resurfacing you do, eventually, and especially down Fairground, where the water is going to run like this, you're going to have a major problem there with it coming up. I want to know, why is it the city's responsibility to have to go in and redo this? And why is it not that the gas company does not take ownership of what they need to do when they in fact have gone and torn up most of these places and resurfaced the whole way? Whatever kind of code it is, but to get back to where it was at square one. Because they continue to do it. They are making money. So nobody's going to tell me they're not making money. And they are getting new customers. But why is it that they do not have to go back and fix?
They, first off, when they do their work, they have to pay significant permit fees to us. So we do get some income back from their work. But our code right now basically says that they are doing a patch in the street, and the street is, the pavement is more than 5 years old, that they have to do a reasonably good patch. And we have details on now on how they're supposed to do that. Our code, our city ordinances don't say that if they cut the street, they got to mill it curb to curb and replace it. If that's where we want to go, then I think we need to discuss that, but that's not the way.
Well, Rodney, with what they are doing as coming across, they obviously are not milling, I don't think, and I don't know what they are putting on. It's like putting concrete down, and you can put a surface over the concrete.
Right.
But why is it? Because now where we are at, as the ones driving the cars and parking the cars, eventually, when snow and ice and everything else, all of that's going to be gutted out again. And again, those coming in even with sidewalks, when they are repairing all of this, they may have to fix the sidewalk that they have destroyed, but then come by and look at the curbs that their vehicles has also taken hunks out of.
And they should
it
replace
is
those.
then our responsibility. But, you know, coming in here and looking at and thinking, oh, what's going on, you know? But this is very, very irritating to me as to other ones that are living on that street. And we're talking Fairground clear down Mulberry, and then what they have done elsewhere in the city.
It's totally our staff's responsibility. If they damage curb or sidewalk while they're doing their work, that is on the gas company to fix, and they've replaced a lot of sidewalk in the city. But I guess we have certain standards that if they do a patch here and the next patch is, say, 50 feet down the road, we don't require them to mill out everything and repave it unless the street was just repaved in the last 5 years. If we want to do that, we can, but that would I mean, I think we would hear from them.
Oh, yeah, I guess we would, but again, they're making the money.
Yeah, I
It's
don't
just
think-
like insurance
I
salesmen,
think that
they're
would be
making money too,
pretty unusual
okay, but
for
we're
a
paying the
municipality
policy.
to do that, but they can always tell us that we're harder on than everybody else. So
Well, all I can say is that I want to know, is it fact that where we park at, that it is not going to be
if,
overlaid then? Where it is cut out?
where if there's patches that are close together, we'll combine them. But if they're just isolated patches, they'll just do a permanent patch on that. And then down the right side, down the right
That's
side.
about the quality of the overlay.
You should see, I mean,
Well, they're
look.
just
Quality of the
temporary right
overlay,
now.
I think.
Yeah.
Am I reading
They do a
Mhm.
temporary patch until the work's finished, then they come
And I
back
know
and
that
do a
that is
permanent
temporary,
patch. Yeah.
and I have seen even the permanent, and we are patched from one end of this town to the other end with the gas company doing what the gas company does. And when the gas company started back after this road was resurfaced, is when then that it should have been, looked at. But it's just horrible that we go to that amount of money as we do as the city, and then they come and start digging up, and the only requirement is permits.
Well, let me put it another way, that Penny's issue. Maybe not connecting, but is the quality of the patch that we require, is that adequate?
I think so. The permanent patch.
The
temporary
permanent
may
patch
not look that great.
and the smoothing of that permanent patch and the matching to the pavement.
Right. I mean, I think ours are actually better than state highways requirements for patching.
So is everyone in favor of the proposed list for 2014 and 2015?
Yes. Right.
So we can give direction to Rodney on that?
So we'll put those on the voting session.
All right. Thank you again for that great
Yeah,
presentation. I think we should forward that on to the governor. The next item on our agenda is crime-free housing, proposed legislation and changes related to chapters 95 and 197. Presenting this will be our city administrator, Chief Mark Holtzman, John Lestitian, who's our head of Department of Community and Economic Development, and Mark Boyer, our city attorney.
And if
Mr.
I-
City Administrator.
Yeah, if I could just kick things off, we understand for mayor and council that both housing and neighborhood quality of life are a real priority. We did the resolution that mayor and council adopted on October 22nd, and as we said then, we'd come back with proposed legislation. This is the first presentation of some draft legislation. We're developing some additional ideas that we'll be bringing back on other topics. But obviously, this is a major effort, I think, to look at your priority of both neighborhoods and housing. We're not looking for a decision today. We anticipate coming back on the 19th or at a future work session that works for mayor and council to further consider this. And Mark and John have done the lion's work on this with Mark Boyer's assistance in drafting the legislation. So I'll let them, I think maybe Chief, you want to take the first shot at making the presentation, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council, for entertaining this discussion tonight about crime-free in Hagerstown. I also want to, before I get too far along, I want to recognize Officer Jerry Kendall, who's our crime prevention officer and also pulling double duty as a patrolman now. He's been a leader in the crime-free program for our city and started off as a volunteer program. Brought this to our attention a number of years ago that other cities are taking this effort on as a citywide ordinance in various fashions, and helped get us to the point where we are today.
Chief, let me just ask this question. As I understand it, this issue is sufficiently important that Officer Kendall is going to become a full-time officer on this issue in February?
Yeah, that's
Is
our
that the
goal.
understanding?
That's our goal. Yeah, it's going to take a full-time commitment from our department, and we'll have Jerry lead that effort.
Thank you.
Along with code enforcement. It's going to have to be a partnership. And I'll talk a little bit about Mount Prospect, which is one of the models in outside Chicago that already has this program in place. So in addressing this, the first thing was how can we make neighborhoods safer? And throughout my career, over and over again, the issue of management of rental properties comes up over and over again. We hear about absentee landlords. We hear about landlords that aren't just very active in their management. So this is about promoting the safety of the neighborhoods by giving a good basis for training for landlords and an operator's license, which is the key component in this. And a real information sharing between law enforcement and the property managers, where we have some mechanisms in place that we can share our information. In other words, if a police officer goes to a rental property for a call for service, we can share that information in very near real time with the property managers, so they know the next day what's going on at their properties. We already piloted this with some of our other crime-free housing units like the Bradford, where they get daily emails from us about where we're at and what's going on in their units so they can take immediate action. So some of those partnerships are already working for us. So in addressing the crime-free component, I want to talk about where we want to do it. And the first thing we want to talk about is that no neighborhood is exempt from crime. And rental units, where we see these, they pop up in any neighborhood. So there's no neighborhood that's exclusive that or excluded from the idea of crime. I have a handout here. I'll pass around, and it's a chart. The first chart talks about we have about a 60-40 rental to home ownership, and it's about upside down from what you see throughout the state. Our own numbers are close to about 60% of the rental units, or 60% of the housing in our community is rental. The first chart you're seeing is our total calls for service, and we screened out some, but what we're looking at here is about a 56% overall response to rental properties versus 44% at residential, and you would say that's close to what we see or what we think is our population here. What's missing here are some of the owner plus ones that are not in this category, and a lot of the properties in town that are being rented, and we don't even know about it. So this 56% could be a bit larger and get closer to that 60, which is what we believe it is. And if you look on the map, the second page there, you'll see that there's no neighborhood that's exempt from this. Rental properties are all over the place throughout the city. They're not just concentrated in one particular area. And these are actual calls for service that we went to at rental properties throughout the city. You flip the chart again, and now we get into what we're calling quality of life issues. These are properties, these are calls for service, and the first line there underneath the chart, you'll see that narrow down to disorderly conduct, public nuisances, noise complaints, drug violations, and weapons calls. And now you start to see the scale tilt towards rental properties and away from residential properties, which tracks along with my experience in that typically a call for service for us ends up at a rental property versus a residential or a homeowner one. It favors residential or rental properties. And that's what this chart shows. Then again, when you look where those crimes are taking place on the last chart, you'll see again they're distributed throughout the city. So I think what my first question is, where do we do this program? We do it citywide. Another reason we do it citywide, and the next thought would be, do we do just large apartment complexes? Do we do single family? Where do we stop it at? And it's sort of a very much a red zone to get into. We do not want to single out for demographic, for economic status. The thought is, just deal with it in a certain area, but that may inadvertently target a certain population group that may just be poor or, for whatever reason, not balanced. So the idea by doing it citywide and by not limiting it to just larger apartment buildings or apartment buildings in a certain part of the city, by doing it citywide, we treat everybody the same. And that's the goal, treat everybody the same and apply it evenly throughout the city. So that's sort of the where as far as the map goes. And then within the map, what size of apartments, what type of apartments do we do? I just think it has to be blanketed. And John and I have talked, and from a city staff standpoint, we stopped right there and said, it really just does need to be. We cannot support anything that's not a blanket approach for all neighborhoods and for all types of apartments.
there gets to be a slippery slope. And if we are saying that education of the landlords and crime-free housing is important, we have to say from a staff perspective and from our research that it's important throughout the city. As the chief had said, in our research, we have found critics of these programs saying that if you have a targeted approach, it can single out people of different demographics or racial minority groups, people with children, if you're targeting buildings that have 3 units or 3 bedrooms instead of a studio. So the safest way for a municipality to look at this liability-wise and to avoid those issues is to say that we're going to apply this regardless of the type of unit in rental housing, regardless of where it is in the city, and apply it uniformly.
And I think, too, as we talked about it at the staff level, just sending the message from the city that all neighborhoods are important.
The next handout that's coming around is an actual example of a crime-free housing newsletter from Mount Prospect. This is out just north of Chicago. It's a town a bit larger, about 55,000 people. And Officer Kendall contacted them, and we looked at a number of different ordinances, and their ordinance modeled the one that we thought would fit us the best. And so some of the points in our ordinance did originate from theirs. In looking at the results, they've been doing the program for about 5 years, and they've seen a reduction in calls for service for the repeat types of disturbances at those locations, over a 20% reduction in calls for service. But more importantly than just saving police resources is you have to think about going to the neighborhood over and over again, the police showing up at that rental property next door, and here's the police again, the red and blue lights, and it puts a strain on a neighborhood. So every time you can reduce those by a couple of calls per year at that location, it just we think improves the neighborhood overall. And on the back you can see the results from year over year. And before I get too far down the road with the details of our program, one of the things they pointed out to us in Mount Prospect and other towns that have done this is that they've also seen a reduction in gang violence and gang presence within their communities because the tenants become actively involved in this, especially in the apartment complexes, and report things faster and take action. So they've had some good success of reduction in gangs and the gang presence. So in building our ordinance doesn't stand by itself. It's tied directly to the rental facilities license, which is in Chapter 197, and then in the excessive use of police services, which is in Chapter 95. And so in leading off with the new ordinance is a crime-free housing ordinance, and it has a couple of key components I put in your packet memo. The first one and the biggest one would be the crime-free housing operator's license. So again, we thought we need to make this as easy as possible. So we're going to pare down the training seminar, which will be offered free, and the program will be offered free. And we just didn't want to add another barrier in there to the program. It's important to us just to get it done. The councilman asked how we're going to support this. We think it's a great investment for the police department to make, even as strapped as we are, is to begin to pull back off a crime prevention officer and support this full on. And we think we're going to see the return on investment down the road in building these, reduction in calls for service and the better relationship with the property managers.
And so, Mark, just to be clear on that, so what we're saying is for all residential rental owners or managers, there needs to be a license.
Yes. Yeah, the first thing would be, again, for all residential properties, from the largest to the smallest, they'll need an operator's license. To obtain an operator's license, we'll put on a seminar, be a couple hours long. We'll go over the basics that we see in crime prevention techniques that can be used, screening techniques that can be used, management principles that are part of the crime-free program itself, which is, again, is proven to be a good model. And then we issue an operator's license.
No fee or charge for the license.
Right. No fee or charge for the license, no fee or charge for the seminar. We just need a couple hours of investment from property managers. The second part is the crime-free housing. We talked about the crime-free housing seminar, written lease requirement, and beginning in July 1 of 2014 will be a lease requirement. Right now, under Maryland property law, our attorneys here, I believe it's 4 or more. If you have 4 or more units, you're required in Maryland to operate. In other words, if you have an apartment building with 4 or more, you have to use a written lease. And I was surprised that certain landlords do not use written leases, and they're not required. This ordinance requires all landlords to use a written lease. And then within that written lease, a crime-free provision. A couple of paragraphs, they're embedded right in the city ordinance that just clearly state the property is not to be used for criminal activity by the tenant, the guests, or persons under their control on or near the property. We think of some examples, and it's important, I think, to tell some stories, and we have some areas. We have an area that was chronic for some public drinking in the city. And it was a property where the rear of the property was being used for public drinking, but it was spilling out into the alley. So that's an example of on or near the property. They're handing the beer bottles and whiskey bottles back and forth over the fence. It's occurring in the alley, but it's associated with the property, and that's what we're talking about, on or near the property, as an example.
That was Mr. Brubaker's neighborhood, wasn't it? Sorry. Go ahead.
So that's the crime-free housing provision. The rental license, facilities license, you want to speak to that a second?
Well, currently we require rental facility licenses. And the way we see the crime-free program working, although it's under a separate ordinance, we would administer the licensing in terms of making this streamlined, user-friendly. We currently, for example, collect lead paint information on our applications for the rental facility license. Similarly, we would collect the operator's license information. So the first year, getting all the property owners or their respective managers licensed as operators, we anticipate there would be a separate application. But any renewals thereafter, we just have a blank on the form and a signatory affirmation saying, I affirm that I've completed this training and I'm going to abide by the requirements of the crime-free housing, which would include the lease provisions in that. So it will be streamlined. We have the technology in place. We have the systems built. Staff have already explored what it would take to tweak our database systems to make this work, and we can do this. In terms of changes to the rental facilities ordinance, the requirement is that you would have to have the operator's license. That's the change. And if someone doesn't have an operator's license, we wouldn't be able to issue the rental facility license. We will have procedures worked out with the police department. So if someone acquires a property mid-year, we would accept their application. We would be working with them, refer them over to the police for the next scheduled training. They would go through the training, provide the number, sign off, and be issued their full license. So,
John, if you would, just to be clear, though, we're not changing who's required to have the rental facilities license. If you could just explain that.
Correct. Currently, the rental facilities ordinance has exemptions. For example, owners plus one is an exemption currently in rental facilities. In the rental operators program, the crime-free housing program, that individual would still have to get an operator's license, but would not be required to have a rental facilities license. So we are not proposing at this time any changes to the rental facilities program in terms of the scope, in terms of the reach of the program.
If there was a property owner who acquired a property in addition to other properties they already had the license, do they have to?
They just provide us with that number, sir. And we just cross-check it.
They don't have to get another license for every property that they
No, sir.
acquire.
The operator's license is with that individual.
Today we received, I did, I'm sure most everybody else did, email from a lady by the name of Brenda Oberholzer. And she says, one sentence, I'm a landlord, not the parent of police, not the parent or police of my tenants, and this ordinance would make me financially liable for their actions. Can you respond to that, those comments in any way?
Well, sure, I can talk to it. It just leads right into excessive use of police services. We've had this one on the books for a number of years now.
Okay.
And that's where the term chronic nuisance property is just another term for what we used to call probationary nuisance status. And what this deals with are repeat disturbances at a property. So that's been in existence up to this point. Now we're strengthening that. We're lowering the threshold on that number, but it's always been there. And we have used it successfully in the past and mailed warning letters to property owners, commercial properties, some bars, some rental properties. I've not mailed any that I know of to a residential property, but it's existed for all those properties. And it means that if the police are repeatedly going back to the property for a disturbance, at some point the property owner has to take responsibility for that and get involved in that. They just cannot turn a blind eye to that. And so this excessive use of police services ordinance has been in place. It's been effective for us. And what we do is we mail a warning letter out. It comes from me and it's signed off by the chief, and it goes to them, to the property owner, and it explains to them the nature and number of times we've been to the property, and if those types of calls qualify or not. So in other words, we don't count it against them if there's a domestic violence call. We don't count it against them if they're a victim of a crime, that sort of thing. We're talking about disturbances, and they're listed in the ordinance here. So if that's repeatedly happening, at some point there has to be some action that's taken. And so the warning letter goes out, and the landlords take action to abate the problem. And it's been effective for us. It has been the result of property managers actually getting involved. What other way do they know that there's even a problem going on unless we warn them and let them know? And I've had great response with those. Every time we sent the letters out to the property managers, we get a phone call, we explain what we've given them, and then they either go and talk to the tenants or take some other abatement action, however serious it may be. Yes, if they don't do anything, there is a fine that can take place. We've not had to fine anybody. We've had this ordinance now for a number of years and had not had to fine anybody with it. It's been that strong in its wording and its response from the landlords that we've not had to fine anyone. But a fine can take place. Now, in this case, the way this ordinance is written is in a 12-month period, if there are 3 disturbances at the same location, a warning letter is mailed. We're going to mail a warning letter earlier than that, probably at the second notification. The third one, they can be placed on a chronic nuisance property status. They stay on that status for a year. And during that period of time, the property manager needs to take reasonable steps. They'll be communicating with us what's going on, who's doing it, what's happening, what apartment's it in, is it a tenant or a guest, and we'll give the specific information and share it with them and give them the opportunity to take some action. It's not until the 4th violation at that, or 4th occurrence at that location where they're even subject to a fine. But you have to have a fine or it just doesn't seem to have the teeth to it. So this has been in existence. We have certainly tightened up the standard on it. The way we're doing the practice now is when we hit 2 or 3, we mail out a warning letter, and I have not had any actually reach even the old number, which was 10. We get a quick response on them. So I'm expecting the same thing with this program. But that's the chronic nuisance property status.
I would say that in recognizing that the landlord does not want to be the parent or the police, they do have a responsibility and obligation to the neighborhood, even if they don't reside in it. They own property there, and that is the whole point behind these proposed changes to the ordinances.
So this really has nothing to do with the background of the individual who may move into the apartment or the house.
That's correct.
This has to do with the behavior of the individual once that individual lives in that house.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. It has everything to do with the behavior of the individuals that are there.
What's sad is that your person who has the rental property does not go in and does not check out who they are renting to. And again, a lot of those, they can rent to one person, but the other individuals that are coming in there, and that's where it really starts to get.
Too many of them live in Washington, D.C. and other places where they really don't have any contact with them.
Right.
So once again, the license is free, and the seminar is free.
That's correct.
And there is no upfront legal problem for the homeowner or the apartment owner until the fourth time the tenant is commits something.
That's correct.
And
After they've been deemed a chronic nuisance property is when they can start to receive fines.
Is such a bad actor that it comes up on the fourth time. Can that tenant be forced out by anybody besides the homeowner?
The city's not going to take any abatement action on it. What we're going to do, the crime-free housing provision, in a sense, the lease in one sense protects the tenants by making landlords use a lease, which it helps protect the tenants' rights, so they know what their rights and responsibilities are. The lease provision within this can help protect the property owner or property manager by saying, here's the provision that you violated, and use that for whatever action they want to take.
Okay.
But the city will not be evicting anybody. I think that's an important point.
That was going to be my question. Is what I was hearing was it was all the responsibility was placed on the property owner, but in this model lease or does the lease require a provision that allows the landlord to evict a tenant if they do these violations?
It does. That's the main addition to written lease requirements that we've added, and that is if we're giving the landlord or the property owner the tool to get someone out of their property if they're committing a crime on the property.
Are we requiring that or recommending that?
We're not requiring it initially, but it becomes a violation of the new ordinance if they haven't utilized that tool and made steps to at least try to get that problem solved once they reach the excessive use, the chronic nuisance status.
And is that acceptable under Maryland law to evict someone for something that could never reach the level of a felony but a series of misdemeanors? If I have that right, Chief.
Yes, it certainly can be. Now, typically that's a factual determination made by a judge in a proceeding in the district court to evict a tenant. Some things will rise to that level, some things will not. But our landlord will not be penalized under our ordinance if they made the attempt and used the tool, even if they don't effectuate the eviction.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You know, it is a reasonable, they need to take reasonable steps. And if they were to take, for instance, in this case, take the tenant to court and try to do an eviction and not receive an eviction from a court, certainly that's a reasonable effort that they're trying to make to correct the problem. And we would not be fining them. We would just continue to work with them.
But I would presume the landlord could take the citations invoked by the police department as evidence that this was occurring.
Yes, absolutely.
You would be I assume, some kind of citation for these things.
Well, what they'll take actually is the information that we'll share with them. Long before a citation, we'll share those 3 disturbance calls with the property owner. And give them the information that they need to if they want to take it to
eviction. So if it's a disturbance call, even if no misdemeanor and/or citation results, it still counts under this proposal.
Right, and I'll use an example there of a loud party and just a large party going on at the house. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, the police
the one your son ran.
The police, he's 10. The police get a call. I don't know. The police get a call for service at a property, and they go into an apartment building. This is every night for us, someplace, and there's a loud party going on. You can hear it coming through the door. It's obviously disturbing the neighbors. They've called. The police officer gets there. The police are trained to know what's called, is it qualify or not? They're asked that on the radio. and the dispatcher logs that in the computer. When they get there, they open up the door, say, hey, you're causing the disturbance, you got this loud party, everything's spilling out back, whatever it happens to be. So they agree, okay, we'll turn the music down, we'll button everything up, we'll be respectful neighbors, and it ends. But it still occurred. It wasn't a police report, nobody went to jail, but it was a disturbance. It was verified by the police officer that it was associated with that apartment. It was qualified as a disturbance here, but again, nobody went to jail on that one. But that information gets shared with the landlord to say who we contacted when we got there, what date and time it happened, what the notes are written in there by the dispatcher and by the police officer when he cleared the call. That computer sheet is shared with the landlord, and that's what goes out when I mail out a warning letter to the property owner. Here are the 3 or 4 calls for service that we've had there, and here's the specific information that they use, and they find that to be helpful, and they could use that.
The language is very clear in the crime-free lease provision that the suggested language that we have for the provision, it says quite clearly, a violation of the above provision shall be a material and irreparable breach of the lease and good cause for immediate termination of tenancy. Proof of a violation of the lease hereunder shall not require a criminal conviction, but shall be by a preponderance of the evidence. So the calls for service alone would create the evidence that would be used by the landlord to evict the tenant who's in violation of their lease provision.
To take the tenant to court.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
to take the tenant to court. Yes, so we would provide that information free of charge to them. We're not going to charge them a fee for a copy of a piece of paper. We want to give this to them.
And the
so
whole
they can
idea
be
is
good
we
managers.
want landlords to be partners and good corporate citizens with, or actual citizens of their neighborhoods.
Absolutely. I mean, I can share another example. We had one in an apartment complex to the east, we'll say, we had a couple of calls for service at this location, and we actually talked about this in our ComStat meetings. Hey, this might be a problem. I think this person is letting this gentleman stay there that's not supposed to be on the lease. By the time we called the landlord after the meeting, this was only 2 days later, by the time we called the landlord, the property manager there, they said, oh, we already know about that because we got your email from you. They're in our program. We got your email and 2 days ago, and we've already taken action with that tenant to let them know they can't have that guest there. So that was good to hear. So that's the level of information sharing I'm talking that we can achieve that.
Well, we had an email not long ago from a property owner, and I won't make this too specific, but your officers did a great job of raiding the business recently, not long ago, and finding that they were selling illegal drugs. But the owner of the property was afraid to take action against the person, the renter, without knowing that, because he was afraid the renter would sue him. I mean, I know you know who I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And frankly, if that's the case, this sounds like it's going to help a whole lot of property owners in their efforts to take care of their property.
Well, that's a perfect example, because I know who you're talking about, of a property owner who needs educated.
Well, sure.
And that could use the seminar that the city is going to be providing free of charge so that he knows what his rights and responsibilities are as a landlord.
So that's the 6 points there in the packet that we covered. It covers changes to the 2 ordinances that are already in place: the rental facilities license, the excessive use of police services. Again, the numbers are changing. It's something for you to consider and look at when you have more time to digest all this. And then just an overview of the new crime-free housing ordinance, and the big key there is the crime-free housing operator's license, which we think is going to really improve the management of these properties and in the neighborhoods.
John, the really big change would be for those having double dwellings. That would be
Yes.
owner, plus 1. So they then are also required to go to this.
Correct.
Right.
They would have
And
to
that's
do-
what has to really be pointed out, because they have gone so long without having to do rental licensing that, they have to be up to snuff on that as well.
And outreach is going to be key there.
Okay. Yeah.
So the only thing folks like that have to risk then, Penny, is learning something new.
No, it's not a risk. I mean, I think that it's a good thing for those who actually rent their property.
Right.
But again, not having that in place with the previous program, it is going to be an outreach trying to get to those that need to say, okay, this is what has to be done.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is going to apply to the big boys as well as the little boys, right?
And
across the
girls.
board.
Evenly.
We have some apartment dwellings in town, which I'm under the impression use a great deal of the police time. I won't mention their names here, but one of them's in the north end of Hagerstown. And this will apply to them, and they'll have no option but to allow it to apply to them.
Right, and I guess just to clarify one more point, if someone were to own a property and they are an out-of-town property owner that does have rental property, if they use a local management company, someone from the local management company would attend the training and put it underneath their license. So even you may be an owner, but you might not have to attend if you have another. But your property manager or your agent has to attend the training. So any one of them can use their operator's license for this.
Okay, I'm sorry, Kristen just has one other question. My final question. I move here from out of town. I buy an apartment building, and I know nothing about the law. The next day I advertise, and within the day or two somebody comes along, looks at the apartment, likes the apartment, says, here's my deposit, I'm going to move in tomorrow. Does the landlord, get into any trouble because that landlord hasn't taken the training yet?
I can address how we currently handle those under the rental facility, sir. We find new rental properties all the time. And it's not uncommon for someone to buy here in the city, not be familiar with the programs. We don't penalize them. If we can show that they knew about the program, that's a different story. So if someone has ownership in other rental properties here in the city and we show they have known about our program, then we take enforcement action. If it's clear that they did not know, our goal is compliance. It's not to issue fines. Our goal is to make sure the facilities are safe, and with this new program, to ensure that the training takes place, the lease provisions are in place, and the quality of life in our neighborhoods is improved.
And there's a 90-day window upon the transfer of ownership of a rental facility to a new owner, or if your designated licensee moves on, you no longer hire that property manager. There's a 90-day window to get back in compliance.
And a total of 180 days if they can get a conditional license in the meantime.
Yeah, the 90-day window applies, and if we can't offer them the course, then I think we issue them, I guess, a conditional license at that point for the additional time.
Well, it would be nice, too, that with as much real estate that does get sold, I know that there was issues with those living in historic places. When people would come in, they would have a realtor here, and there have been people that really did not know, hey, this is a historic district. And then after they've done this and this, then they realize that. So again, if the realtors as well would be on board with handing out papers that go with the city. Not everybody's going to come to City Hall, okay? But your realtors, which there's a lot of business that's going on, they also could be a help in this.
So distribute some information to the realtors.
Correct.
They can be the point,
Yeah.
a point of contact or
Yeah.
point of distribution.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's how it has been with historic, your historic properties. People just don't realize. And then it's like, oh my, the city is really, and no, this is what was in place. So
It's going to be very difficult to get property owners and realtors to make the connection that there's that all properties would fall under the crime-free provisions, but that the rental facilities would tick along at anything above, owner plus one, right? So there's going to be an assumption made that provision is still in effect for the crime-free. So it's just going to be a difficult separating those two. And something else I wanted to point out is, just for members, for whatever the wisdom of the existing law, we're dropping on commercial property the number of qualifying calls in a 12-month period. And I'm not criticizing this, I'm just pointing it out, from 20 to 10. And I guess there's owners of certain facilities are going to say, what can I do? I run an alcohol establishment or something like that. But, that's neither here nor there. That's what it is. For residential properties, it's going to drop from 10 to 3 or 2 if one constitutes a felony under Maryland law, and I have a question about that. And then finally, for multi-unit residential properties, from 25 to 6. Is that for the whole, when it says multi-unit, for the whole complex or one address, or how does that work?
The way we've handled that up to this point is it's per building.
Per building, okay. So within if there's several buildings under the same ownership in the same development, it's still per building rather than per apartment.
That's how it's been administered up to this point.
All right. Now, Mark, I think this falls under you. It says at least one of which constitutes a felony under Maryland law, and then we've added a line referencing felony to the disturbance is listed. Does that mean a felony conviction or simply a felony arrest?
It's conduct. It's the conduct.
I would, if I got arrested for a felony and I was thrown out in court, I would say I didn't have that conduct. The court
The
threw
whole
it out.
idea is it's a call for service.
I think it would depend on why it may have been thrown out in court. If it was thrown out in court because the identity of the individual were wrong, then I agree it wouldn't become a qualifying call. Under the excessive use, we identify the qualifying calls. We tell the landlord, you've qualified. They have an opportunity to come in and appeal to administrative board that this shouldn't be a qualifying call, and here's why. They do have that opportunity. But it is the conduct we're directed to, and it is a civil standard, not the criminal standard. So we're looking at the conduct rather than an actual conviction.
So somebody shoots somebody, but it's proved in court that somebody else did it. It's still a felony arrest. I'm exaggerating, but that happens.
The landlord could come in to the board and say that shouldn't qualify because guess what? This is not my tenant. It was someone else. And they would be in front of the board at that point.
Mr. Alshire, I know you had some questions or comments. Thank you for being patient.
Just a couple. The first question is on, I guess, the second page, where it says rental unit, and then it talks any single dwelling unit. It doesn't state in here whether it includes units that are provided on a temporary basis, for example, the REACH shelter. So I'm just curious whether those types of rental units within the city would apply.
I would defer to Mr. Boyer. I would think that that would probably fall more under the hotel motel, and that's outside of the landlord-tenant law. And Mark, if you have thoughts.
Yeah,
on
I mean
that.
that's a good point. I think maybe
At the Union Rescue Mission.
Yeah, I think maybe we can address the language just to clean that up a
Wells
little
House.
bit.
The W house. Yeah.
That might fall actually under a commercial property as far as the excessive use of services versus the
They're not really
operator's
renting
license here to obtain an operator's license.
They may not be
paid by the
renting, but we
government.
certainly want them to be
Right, they're getting paid,
crime-free,
right.
responsible landowners.
Right.
Right, they're still
Who are
under
providing
the,
rooms for tenants.
Yeah.
there's a crime. Jerry's probably digging his heels back there, but there's also crime-free programs for a lot of different things. There's some for hotel motel to provide some guidance and standards in operating a hotel motel. So we could, for those.
I look at it this way. If we're going to enforce an ordinance such as this on a property owner that has 4 units and they get 3 calls for service for the year and all of a sudden fall under a certain criteria of negligence, while we stand witness to another facility that rooms 40 to 50 people a night that conduct themselves in less than a responsible manner, then we're not being fair to what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, they're definitely going to fall under the commercial status of this ordinance. That's where they would fall.
The Dagmar would be residential.
I think a couple of the aspects of the crime-free housing are not going to apply very well to the REACH shelter situation, and that would be the educational component, probably not as necessary for an organization like that.
Why?
Well, I mean, I'm assuming that they're trained. W House certainly.
I mean, I've gotten an email
Great
regarding
shelter.
that specific location in the last month, whereby I haven't gotten emails about 6,000 other locations in the city.
Well, that's just one point. The other is, I don't think a written lease works for those. I mean, I think that defeats the purpose of those facilities. So
Yeah, you're not gonna have a written
it's going to be hard to squeeze that one
Yeah,
into the.
well, the Wells
into
House
the
down
ordinance.
on Baltimore Street, I know, was a major problem.
We may want to investigate if there's another vehicle to address those issues.
Well, and part of this ordinance talks about a voluntary program as well. Maybe that's how, maybe we reach out and the educational component, maybe we can get them involved voluntarily.
Right. There are plenty of other volunteer programs through the crime-free. One of them is Hotel Motel. It's a volunteer program. It's educational based, as our multi-unit program is.
Okay.
But I would just, to answer it, the way I read this, the REACH would fall underneath the commercial property for excessive use of services, where all those disturbances would be counted as qualifying events against the property, and but they wouldn't qualify under the crime-free.
I can think back over the email correspondence over the last year, well, I guess 8 months now we've been, and you know, from establishment to establishment, email for email, percentage based, we have certainly gotten more correspondence regarding those types of facility provisions within the city than we have your average rental unit.
Well, may I make a suggestion? And that suggestion would be, it's one thing for us to get emails, it's another for you guys to get calls for service. So why don't we get statistics from HPD on calls to service for these types of facilities so we can determine what issue actually exists and what we should do about it.
Well, and that brings me to my second point, which is the way you have these broken down here are fine, and clearly you have heard from me, you know, and I said it again yesterday when the paper asked was, you know, this provision that it apply to residential units of 4 units or greater. I would be interested, as you have broken down the numbers here, or real interested, to see maybe not just the plus ones, which I imagine that map's going to get real empty real quick, but less than 4 before, at least for me, before I would sign on to this blanket approach of everybody, including the plus ones. I may be willing to bend on the lower than 4, but I'm not sold on including the plus ones into a program that hasn't been included.
But again, statistics would be very interesting if we have them. I don't know if you can supply those kinds of statistics.
I try to break the data down into apartment buildings with 4 or more,
right,
3 or less.
And I can say that, and I'll double check this tomorrow, but it's my understanding that 41% of our rental facilities are single units.
Okay, again, things like this are...
But of that 40%, they're not all plus ones.
No, because plus ones are not in
A
that.
small percentage of those.
So the plus ones are not included in that. 41% of our rental units are.
And that's what I said. You might get me on the less than 4, but I'm not sold on adding the plus ones into this.
Are half double,
I'm just not.
or are just a single family standalone home.
I just think it's going to be difficult having 2 programs with different standards.
The next item is the requirements of this section shall be valid for a 2-year period. Does that mean that I think we have to ask this question on previous sort of implementation of regulations applying to landlords and rental properties is, I'm operating properties and I got to re-up this certification every 2 years. If I'm operating properties that I manage or own in good standing without a single blemish, what is the purpose for recertification every 2 years?
The training. And I think ongoing training, continuing education is a positive thing.
I mean, I look at this memo you provided us for this crime-free housing newsletter from Mount Prospect, and it notes here that, they encourage folks to attend. They haven't seen some folks since the first year was initiated 6 years prior, which was 2007. And I guess I just look at that and say, here is an incentive-based process whereby here we're regulating it pretty stringently into a 2-year time frame.
I believe even theirs requires a renewal. That just might be an
Okay.
expo, like a open
Like
house.
you haven't been to the expo, okay.
Right, you haven't been to the expo. And I think in the expo, what they're doing is they're bringing all the vendors and insurance companies and all those kinds of people together at an expo versus a straight out training where they're not included in the room, and we're just going over good management practices, crime prevention through environmental design, the latest that we found in tenant screening tools that are available for free, things like that we would just want to continue that dialogue. And I would say also our goal was to make a renewal process much shorter, hopefully even an online quick tutorial kind of thing to take after the initial face-to-face seminar.
The whole idea is to make sure that they are aware of whatever the current code and requirements are from the city, in addition to whatever.
Updated technology.
Right. So, and I really think, honestly, I think the plus ones, as it were, are probably the most important people to include, because those are more likely to be your sort of mom and pop landlords who might not know anything about being a landlord, who need the education the most.
I would disagree.
They're also the ones that are
living right
next to
Yeah, and that was the reason for the
Yeah.
exemption before. Do you have a ballpark figure as to how many there are of those, John? If you could just check that.
Yeah, we'll
All
try to run
right.
that down.
Yeah.
Maybe hard, whatever you
The-
find out.
Under 7B, compliance with state law, you refer to Maryland Real Property Section 8208. I'd just like to get a copy of that.
Yeah,
I can read
it's,
what
it's
I'm.
just
Okay, it's-
basic,
that's-
it's basic law, real estate.
Right,
And-
that's Maryland's very minimal requirements for what
Very
need to be in
minimal,
written.
and go into the
So I don't want to adopt a code that I haven't.
Right.
I'll be accused of doing the healthcare laws. 7C, these additional required provisions, I'm assuming the reason that they are spelled out is because they are not explicitly in the Maryland Real Property Section 8208.
That's correct.
And then under, what is it, C, I don't know, 2 on the next page.
Thank you.
The Hagerstown Housing Authority appears exempt, similar to, I'm assuming, why it's exemption from the rental licensing program, because they provide a program which is substantially similar to that program in which we provide.
And Mr. Boyer may want to address this further, but the federal government charges them with licensing or with renting properties.
Right.
I don't think we would be able to tell them they're not allowed to rent a property.
Right. I mean, I think it would be a duplicated effort. I think we've got some restrictions there on what we can do. But actually, they've got a little more leeway with criminal activity than we do. They cut off the money for
they take
one
people
offense,
out.
and
They
they
just throw
screen
people
out
out
people based on past conduct, and
And I
you
guess
can't do that.
my question that you probably answered there is, operationally, I don't want to be a landlord in this city that's managing my properties in a responsible manner, have 0 calls for service, and then read a report that the Housing Authority has 100 calls for service in a year, you know what I mean, and isn't subject to some similar level of enforcement and accountability. So I think, as long as there is that mirrored level of accountability, I would understand. But if there's not,
My experience is
then I don't think it's
Maryland
appropriate.
thrown out of public housing on criminal charges.
And then under number 2, it says shall not engage in any act intended to facilitate criminal activity and shall not permit the premises to be used for to facilitate criminal activity. The individual engaging activity is a tenant, a member, and then it goes on to 3. And my basic question is, this concern of I guess protection of landlords, which you talked a little bit about earlier, but right here in bold, that violation of the above provisions shall be a material and irreparable breach of the lease. and good cause for immediate termination. The city will, while it's spelled out in here that it shall be a breach of the lease, it really doesn't say.
It doesn't mandate
that you got to get rid of the tenant or.
No, but that builds into the lease, gives the landlord the opportunity and the tool to do
so
that.
do we remove the license at that moment?
No, in enforcement, down in Section 8, we actually will only pursue them for a fine for violating the ordinance. Actually, we give them a lot of leeway.
But if you look at 9, it talks about denial, revocation, and suspension.
Correct. Well, we can actually impose a fine or revoke, and I think what we're looking to do is to give them the opportunity to take matters into their own hands and take them to court.
My question is, if we deny the license, does that make that property then immediately uninhabitable?
No, it makes the landlord in violation of this ordinance.
For a tenant, they get in a position with a tenant that they can't reasonably remove.
Well, but if they're taking reasonable steps,
then they're not in violation of the ordinance.
Then
those steps
then
at
they're
times
not
take
violent.
3 to 6 months.
They do. I agree. But they'll have paperwork, a paper trail showing that they're taking
They can show to John
So-
that
In the
they've
same
applied
respect,
to whatever the eviction procedure is.
Let's also not go crazy here. I mean, the paragraph 3, what it does, it provides under the lease the fact that a violation, a criminal violation, is a breach and can be a reason for termination of the lease. But let's not all start thinking that every time somebody who is a tenant commits a crime, that they should summarily be thrown out of their housing. I mean, that's just...
That was my question.
That's nuts. I mean...
But it uses the term shall in here, which is why...
Well, it shall be a material breach of the lease. I don't know if you need the word irreparable, but it's a material breach of the lease by definition, and then gives good cause. And a really quick, easy example would be, do we really expect to kick a family out of housing because we find out that somebody's been convicted of a bad check? You know, that...
Well, and the fact of the matter is, in Maryland, it's hard to get your tenants out. If they violated the lease, you have to take them to the district court. You have to prove that it was a material breach.
And that's what I'm asking about.
And that's what
why we included the term
supplies.
shall in here, because if you go on, I mean, shall is used pretty repetitively.
But because it shall be determined a material breach. It allows for... It doesn't say that the tenant has to be evicted, though.
But it all goes back to pursuant to Chapter 95, which is the chronic nuisance property.
Right.
Okay. The last
Process.
item is on 9. It does not spell out here whether it applies to the crime-free housing operator's license may be denied, revoked, or suspended. I'm assuming you're not going to issue different licenses for every unit. Somebody has 50 units.
Right.
So I'm assuming you're not going to say you've got a bad tenant over here, or you're irresponsibly managing this one property over here, therefore you're revoked in total. I'm assuming that isn't what this section means.
I actually believe it does mean that it's not, I would equate it to a driver's license.
I think we need to make sure that we're clear on that as a
Yeah.
body, that that's what we're adopting.
A driver's license, you're not going to suspend someone from driving on one road. They would not be able to be the operator. They could get someone else to be the operator. They can get a property management company.
But again,
But does it apply then to the owner, or because if I'm the property owner and you're using owner here and you're defining it, and then in your definitions creates a trail of then the owner's agent, etc., somebody gets denied, you're denying that licensed representative, does that then trail into the owner being the owner of the property because you use landlord in here and you term landlord in a certain designation? I want to make sure that I'm property owner A.
No,
I have
you're
licensee
absolutely
B. They're running my 70 properties, and one of the 70 gets a bad situation.
suddenly you lose your license
Now
and
they're
you're the
out,
actual owner.
and that person that's running it for me, running 70 properties, is out based on this conclusion. Where does that put me as the owner of those 70 properties that is going through that
even more
entity to
importantly,
manage them?
A better example would be a management company that manages 50 individual properties owned by 50 different separate owners. And one of those properties that he manages, he doesn't manage according to this, and under this, he's the owner of all of these 50 properties.
So then those 50
managing.
owners gotta find
right.
new.
Well, but I think you need to be careful in here, because under this, the owner, his license is lost.
But Section 6 actually talks about the owner who loses his designated licensee through a lack of employment. But we can certainly build in some language that says if they just lose their license status, that the owner has 90 days to get somebody back in compliance.
And again, so we're all on the same sheet of music. It's not because they have tenants that do the wrong things. It's because once they're notified of it, they take no type of responsible actions whatsoever, right?
But again, if you read Section 6, Section 6 uses the term, where's it at? In the event that a licensed landlord conveys a residential rental unit, so it uses the term landlord. If you go back to landlord, the definitions, it says landlord is the owner of a residential.
Oh no, I agree with you, Christian. I think it needs to be cleaned up for the very
the landlord,
examples
the managing
gave.
company, or is it the owner of the unit?
You have an owner
there
defined
needs to be
various
one
different ways.
licensed individual.
I know. When I read Section 6 and 9, I do not equate them to being the same person.
The problem is under definitions. I mean, you define the landlord as the owner, then you define the owner as a million different people, and I think you have a definitional problem.
All right, we'll work on that.
My question relates to not only how
like I use the example, unlike Lou, which is probably a better example than mine, but I was thinking of like Pella with Washington Gardens, or this guy that's coming in to buy the Alexander. You do something inappropriate, you're out as the licensed entity. Who manages in that duration, and who is the owner?
Right.
I don't have the answer to these questions, but I would like them if such an occurrence arises and we've got to execute this ordinance.
Yeah, now that's an interesting question. What happens if,
And I think if it does apply to certain types of temporary rental housing facilities, then I think it definitely breaks into that question. Who's the owner? Who's the agent? How does that operate? Because I think we need to be able to understand that, because this is clearly has more propensity to be affected by the larger scale units on a sooner basis than the smaller. I mean, that's just what's going to happen.
Section 7, the next to last paragraph in Section 7, right? If we go to Section 8, above that too, just remind me what regular inspections pursuant to Chapter 197 we're talking about.
We conduct both exterior and interior inspections. Interior inspections are conducted tenant turnover, but not more often than every 4 years. And exterior inspections are also conducted every 4 years.
Well, why would we have to notify a tenant that the unit may be subject to inspection and tenant turnover?
It's just another thing to strengthen the landlord, because a lot, most written leases would include a provision that the landlord can go in at reasonable times.
Right, within 24 hours.
Exactly, but I think this just helps put the landlord in a position.
But this inspection doesn't take place while the inspection under 197, as you're telling me, doesn't take place while there's a tenant and occupying.
Yeah, it probably should read that it would be for property maintenance code violation type things, and reference 68-4, I believe it is. Because we do have situations, as Mr. Boyer was beginning to explain, where tenants have stopped landlords from having us come in. Landlords have requested inspectors to inspect a situation, and tenants have said, no, we're not going to let the landlord in, we're not going to let the inspector in, and those situations do occur.
Well, I think we went through this some years ago when we talked about the rental registration to begin with. What I'm hearing is because somebody's a tenant, that if there's a complaint, that they have a requirement to let an inspector in their residence without their permission?
I don't think that's the case necessarily. But I think we're just trying to put the landlord in a better position that if we have an ongoing problem, that he can utilize the lease under reasonable circumstances to go in. But I agree, there's a Fourth Amendment issue there.
And I understand that, Mark, and I think all standard leases, most standard leases allow the landlord to enter in the premises for certain purposes. And you're hitting my point. I just get scared when I hear that government agents may be able to come in against the tenant's wishes and over his objection to inspect the premises. You know, the reason it's interesting, it's sort of like Alice through the looking glass, because the reason we wanted the inspections before was to protect the tenants. Now I'm hearing we want the inspections to protect the landlords, and I think the landlords have the power to protect themselves with the proper lease terms, and I agree with that. I just want to make sure, and I don't have any problem.
Maybe we could rephrase it to talk about notice that it may be subject to inspection by the landlord.
Whatever you think is appropriate, but
because we have actually run into the situation where we can't get in and we need to go to.
I understand, and that's part of this whole thing. Landlords, I would think, would want to protect themselves by giving them that right, and I think if they don't put it in the lease, they're going to lose that right. So I have no problems with that at all, and I have no problems. You answered my question. Thank you.
Sir. That's what happens in Annapolis. Apartments are inspected every year in Annapolis. And the landlord makes the arrangement with the tenant.
Well, we kind of backslid on that one because the inspections used to be what? What were they?
Tenant turnover every 2 years.
And now they're every.
It was every 3 interior, but exterior I think was annually.
Yes.
Starting.
But your council then they left to go longer.
Just 2 final points that are going to sound contradictory. The first is, and I couldn't have provided a better example than this you provided, because what I have heard time and again is, the city needs to look at compromise and incentive, for the good units that we have in this city and the good landlords that we have in this city and the good property management that does occur for probably 90% of our stock in this city. And so I think that this example of this type of expo and all the things he offered here is a prime example of that exact type of incentive and opportunity and compromise that we should roll out to complement what we're trying to do. On the flip side of that, I can still recall back when we implemented rental registration, and there was a quiet lady to my left, quiet conservative lady to my left, that was the tie-breaking vote, who asked a very basic question before voting, and that is, I'm aware of this place, will it apply to that certain rental facility? And the answer was yes, and she said, well, I'm for it. And I think that message resonates in this, is that don't pretend. In other words, we cannot pretend that it doesn't exist and that we don't need a reasonable regulatory measure to address the issues that our residents and businesses see and witness every day.
And finally, since people are referring to personal experience, the Bradford Apartments in my neighborhood, they welcome and participate in these programs, to my knowledge. They want them. They want to know about stuff, and those places they're maintained. They're always doing things there. They're low to moderate income, but they look good. And they want to know, and they want to cooperate in these programs. They've been in here. And so people say it can't be done. Well, there's a model where it's working very well, and they don't command high rents, and they do have a lot of transients. By transient, I mean, people that are living there for a few months, a few years, and then going on, like most garden apartments. But yet they're exceptionally well managed.
All right, they're seeing an increase in their occupancy rate, and they're seeing a decrease in their turnover.
Right. so it can be done.
I would add one suggestion. Under the Chapter 95, excessive use of police services, 95-4, chronic nuisance property list, I would suggest adding, after the word maintain, I would add the words and publish yearly a list of those properties currently deemed chronic nuisance properties by street address and property owner. I think it's good information for the public to have.
Published in the newspapers.
Any other questions or comments?
We'll come back on the 19th with an updated draft. And Mark, staff, and I'll work together and try to reflect your discussion here today, and then we'll go through another round of review with the mayor and council.
I'm sure we will get much feedback from the community, and we welcome that feedback to help create the best product as possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we're on to the city administrator's comments.
Just one this evening, which is just a reminder, next Monday is November 11th, a city holiday. So other than our essential operations, will be closed here at City Hall and in our city offices. That's it for me.
All right, on to council comments. Mr. Munson.
I'd like to congratulate the Alsatia Club
Yes.
and its partners on a very fine parade, Halloween parade. And I would in particular like to congratulate the city employees who cleaned up after the parade. They did a very excellent job in a very quick amount of time. Thank you, Mayor.
Indeed. Mr. Alshire.
A couple of things. Speaking about rental programs, we did receive a month or two back a proposal from one rental property owner for an incentive-based program for public safety incentive for living downtown. I'd like to see if we're going to get that before us for some discussion at some point. And another item is when I attended the Greater Hagerstown Committee meeting the 25th, and it was held downtown at the library. I think it was a good meeting, and at least one of the more positive ones, that I've attended in the past. And then the last item, and I don't know if I touched on this at our regular meeting the other week, but if I didn't, I apologize. But there was a business that contacted me about rehabbing an existing place. A place that I've had to drive by and look at empty for some time. And within hours, our staff had contacted that business, had spoken with them sort of what, their needs were, fit within, I believe, some of our incentive programs, and I believe within a week I had them moving forward, and I see some work going on there. So something positive must have come out of it. But I think that's exactly the type of response that we do hold up and say, these are the types of activities that our staff are working on. So I didn't get involved any more than giving a contact, and I thank staff for running with it.
Thanks. Mr. Brubaker.
Yes, earlier this afternoon, the council and commissioners and many other officials and people involved with the Maryland Theater attended the inauguration of the new sound system. Unfortunately, there was an incident at the theater yesterday, and ironically, the theater has been working on a long-range capital improvements program, but I want to emphasize it can't be the city of Hagerstown that carries that. That's got to be, just like the sound system, a joint city, county, and for the large projects, state thing. It is a regional facility, and along with private investment. So if we all pitch in, we can keep that a linchpin of our downtown and maybe expand it. So while the sound system sounds minor, it really does make a difference. So I encourage everybody to go to a program and enjoy that new addition.
Thank you. Mr. Metzner.
Thank you. Martin took a lot of what I was going to say. I'll only say this. I've been going to the Maryland Theater as long as I've been alive now, and I can assure anybody after today that the Maryland Theater sounds different than it has ever sounded. I can't wait to attend my first concert there after hearing the sound system today. I think it's very positive, and every one of us at one stage during this administration has said it, and so we'll say it again. The Maryland Theater is something that is going to be a major project for this community, and hopefully, you're correct, Martin, from Washington County government, city government, and state government, maybe, let's hope. Thank you.
My question was that I wasn't able to be there, but I wanted to know if the new sound system hit the decibels, and that's exactly what happened with the...
They did.
Okay.
You can turn it up.
Okay. And I thought, oh, okay, perhaps that's what happened. I had an email from a lady, and it has to do with owner on one side, rental on another, and their townhomes. And I'm just throwing it out to council members because it involves smoking, and it involves the secondhand smoke where the renters are not allowed to smoke inside, so therefore they come on the outside. And with that, the connecting of the two properties from where they stand to do their smoking is going into. They're asking for help. I don't know that there is help that can be given, and I don't know that even if making an attempt to get to the landlord is trying to, so what happens?
They can always try mediation.
That's food for thought, and that's what I was going to throw out because I don't know what the circumstances are. I just picked the email up, but I'm just letting you know, the more that comes about with and both of the ladies who live in the one townhome that own it, both have had cancer. So it is a great concern. But I'm throwing it out to you because that could be just more of what we're going to hear. And especially since smoking on the outside now as banning with, the hookah. And with that, so just food for thought. The utility benefit, the monies, I think have gone very well. I think that this group of volunteers have just been really remarkable, and they have really worked very well together. I do wish that we would have gotten the press release out sooner. It was in midday of when the first day was happening, and that there was more people that did not know about it and were still then coming in. So I think that we need to be up on as the city with what we have if we're moving things forward such as this, that it's got to get out earlier. But I'm hoping that, yes, in fact, we will be able to do another benefit because my understanding is that the monies that were there now have been, that it's been used. So the people that did come in, it would be about 2 weeks before they would actually know. But it did go very well. I was a greeter. I was outside. But thank the city very much for at least letting us do this because it did help a lot of families. That's it.
If I can make one point. Lou brought up a very good point about the sound system for Maryland Theater. And one of the points is that in the past, the theater has had to rent that sound equipment at certain times, and the cost of rental of that sound equipment has been approximately $3,000 each time. So this is going to save significant dollars for the Maryland Theater in the future and allow more local groups to be able to use the Maryland Theater as a result.
Indeed. I also want to echo the thanks to the Alsatia Club and the city staff for coordinating the parade. It was an honor and a privilege to be in the parade, first time since high school marching band. And I will put out there that they're looking for more mummers, so if you like dressing up and making merry, be sure to contact the Alsatia Club prior to next year's parade and sign up. We also had our first annual dog costume parade, which was a huge success. We had over 70 entries, and I've already suggested that they take the winners of our dog costume party into the parade, because there's at least a dozen folks right there who will dress up along with their dogs. No. But they were there, and they were barking at every other dog. Donna knows she was there with her dog. But it was a fantastic event. It was great for the city. I know that the Spooky Sprint was also a success, so I look forward to helping, working with the city and the Alsatia Club to bolster, cross-market all those events and keep them successful. Also, just want to make sure everyone knows that this Friday is the North-South Gridiron Classic Championship. It's at North Hagerstown High School. Calais Stadium starts at 7 o'clock. I'll be there to give out the trophy. But right after that, I'll be heading to the Dolman Black Heritage Museum fundraiser, which is from 8 to midnight at the Cortland Mansion. And if anybody's interested in getting tickets, we can help you make that contact if you call City Hall here. So, and also want to invite folks out for Veterans Day at 11 o'clock at the courthouse. There'll be a ceremony to honor all of our nation's veterans. So with that, is there anyone else that has anything else they'd like to say? Well, you would have to be there to know, Mr. Alshire. Yeah. Well, yeah. I was out front announcing the city council coming on the fire truck. Yeah.
I thought you were competing for the Mummer Award.
Well, people did ask me to start pulling rabbits out of my hat, but I reminded them that I just have a gavel, not a magic wand.
Now, one thing I need to say is you look very handsome in your tuxedo with your cane and with your top hat.
Thank you.
Mayor. I thought that was really a fine idea. Next year we need that sign.
Well, yes, that's right. Okay, well, with that, we'll be adjourned.